Good evening and welcome to ENN, the Educational News Network. I am JT Templet, filling in tonight for Walter Cronkite. Since he passed away over 10 years ago, it was difficult for him to get to the studio. Tonight, our special report is on behavioralism. What is it and what does it mean for you and your students? Many of you at home are probably familiar with behavioralism. After all, it has been in classrooms for most of the 20th century. You are aware of the practices, perhaps, because you have witnessed them yourselves. But what is behavioralism itself? According to Bob Bates, behavioralism has its roots in psychology and biology, particularly when it comes to stimulus and response. It is rooted in the late 19th century studies into how people behave and why they behave the way they do. The premise of behavioralism is that people need to be directed and will comply with this direction in response to a stimulus. These stimuli can be either something the individual wants or something the individual fears. This classifies the stimuli into two important categories: rewards and punishments. During our ENN report tonight, it is important for you at home to consider several factors of behavioralism. The first is that the theories were originally developed from psychologists working with animals, who then transferred their theories to human beings. As such, some of the research was concluded using methods that today might be considered unethical. Also, we note that critics of behavioralism view it as an autocratic, transmission-led approach that does not recognize the independent nature of individuals. We will explore several key behavioralists tonight and their contributions during the broadcast. These include Edward Thorndike, John Watson, Ivan Pavlov, B.F. Skinner, Edward Tolman, Robert Gagne, and Siegfried Engelmann. We begin, of course, with Edward Thorndike, who, with his theory of connectionism, is considered the first behavioral scientist, even though he practiced before the term behavioralism was even coined. His research consisted of observing how cats learn to escape from a box using trial and error. The principles from this research determine that learning requires the teacher or someone to stimulate the learner by rewarding successful practices. It also determined that mental connections, otherwise known as learning, become strengthened when practiced and weakened when discontinued. So, how do we see this in the classroom? The importance of continuous learning and building upon prior knowledge, of course. It is important for our students to constantly be stimulated and to learn. If not, the old adage says, you don't use it, you lose it. It also includes trial and error in scientific exploration. This is incredibly important for science teachers and math teachers and any STEM teacher across all levels of education. And it even applies to our own teaching methods. Of course, there are some things that might work with some classes and might not with others. As educators, we are always trying to learn and implement new and inventive ways of teaching and improving upon our own teaching. It is through Thorndike's processes that we do this. While Thorndike is considered the proto-behavioralist, John Watson is considered the founding father of the behavioralist movement. His work on the principles of stimulus and response led to the development of the concept of conditioning. Before we move forward, I reiterate that his methods would not be approved by any research institution today, as they would be considered harmful to the subject. During his experiments, he would work with a subject named Baby Albert, a 9-month-old child. He would introduce the baby to a rat, to which the child originally had no fear and would pet. He then began introducing a loud noise that frightened the child whenever he pet or saw the rat. Afterwards, the child became fearful of the rat, even when the noise stopped being introduced concurrently. Watson's work led Pavlov and B.F. Skinner to develop their own theories of conditioning, known as classical and operant, respectively. Skinner's contributions in radical behavioralism led to the concepts of positive and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement being when a reward is introduced for a behavior. Negative reinforcement, of course, when a punishment is introduced. Skinner concluded that positive reinforcement had longer lasting effects and was therefore more effective. The reason being, this connects to the deep-seated human desire to want. We see the principles of conditioning, whether classical, operant, or Watson's original theories, used in the classroom and through child rearing all of the time, such as behavior modification through awards. A child does well or behaves well in class that day, they get a sticker, right? Or a treasure box. We see it with grading at all grade levels. A grade itself is a reward or a punishment for performance. And in terms of introducing a stimulus and getting the students to respond to it based on Watson's original theories, we see this with learning objectives or learning targets posted on the board every day. The students know what to expect and what the outcome should be. Edward Tolman developed latent learning. Latent learning is when people build up cognitive maps. In other words, we build upon prior knowledge to reinforce and increase our learning through scaffolds. We see this in the classroom all the time, of course, by having our students recall prior knowledge, by adapting lessons based on that knowledge, either increasing the rigor or perhaps having to front load a bit more. This directly connects to Vygotsky's zone of proximal development by determining where our students' knowledge is and where we can guide them to get them to another zone of proximal development. Robert Gagné contributed further to this study by developing 9 levels of learning, where he determined that there was a hierarchical nature of learning broken into 3 levels with 3 parts each. The first is engagement. For anything else to occur, the child must be engaged. It is the teacher's responsibility to gain attention, set out objectives, and stimulate prior learning. The second aspect is delivery. The teacher must present content, provide guidance, and elicit performance. Finally, the teacher must assess learning. They assess the performance, provide feedback, and enhance retention. Siegfried Engelmann further added to Gagné's delivery category through the model of direct instruction. Many still follow this model to some degrees in their classroom. Myself, JT Templet, reporter at ENN, included. We have seen divergence in the presentation of content and the focus on direct instruction. Direct instruction used to play a much larger role, almost an entire class period. Now we know that students learn more through exploration, but we still do use direct instruction to front load, correct, right? To get our students information quickly and in a succinct format. Of course, that depends upon, for direct instruction to be effective, we must follow through. We must keep it short and brief and allow learning to occur in other ways, not solely through lecture for 90 minutes. We also see this through assessment. We know that it's not enough to just assign a grade to our students. It's important to assess them and provide feedback on that assessment so students can retain information, grow upon where their weaknesses were, and then progress to more difficult concepts through the zone of proximal development. I hope you have found this report enlightening. For all of us here at Educational News Network, this is JT Templet. Thank you and good night.